Querido Luis Lacalle Pou, presidente del
Dear Luis Lacalle Pou, President of Uruguay, Honorable Mrs. Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, Excellencies, Costa Rica is extremely pleased that the World Conference celebrating the World Free Press Day returned this year to the Americas, and that our brother country, Uruguay, is the host. The last time UNESCO celebrated in the Americas this conference, it was in my country, Costa Rica. Freedom of press is an essential component of every democratic society. We must defend a free press that is pluralist and independent. We are responsible, and particularly today when threats to democratic states are great from different fields. The topic chosen for this year grants us the opportunity to analyze the behavior and use of social networks and media to disseminate disinformation, negative political messages, and oftentimes destabilizing messages, some discriminatory messages promoting hate speech. This is a calamity and hard to fight that leaves its footprints in our democracies. Let us promote this, and let us be committed with a non-violent communication and a journalism of peace with peaceful alternatives to communicate in times of crisis and post-pandemic. In the context of COVID-19, access to information and the independence of the media have been essential to deal with the challenges posed by the pandemic. Costa Rica has always made calls so that during the crisis caused by this condition, we guarantee the safety of journalists and free access to information so that this can be broadcast without interferences. In Costa Rica, we have reaffirmed the access to the internet and to information as essential elements of the public health policy and health care. Excellencies, we're quite convinced that freedom to share information and ideas empowers individuals and communities, strengthens human development and democracy, and is a sine qua non condition for free, informed societies. For this reason, Costa Rica is still committed in denouncing and fighting for the protection of journalistic work, because it is fundamental for the construction of pacific and inclusive societies. The exercise of free press is constantly under threat, so we must be ready to defend the media from the attacks against its independence and other violations. Each time we close a mouth or imprison a journalist, we are mutilating democracy. These figures increase, and the people responsible oftentimes do not face justice. This is a debt we have, and we must respond to that. Last year, a prize was given to Maria Reza from the Philippines and Dmitry Muratov from Russia that were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace 2021. This is a call to restate the defense of freedom of press and freedom of expression, together with democracy, human rights, and the respect for peace. Costa Rica joins forces to fight for the protection of journalistic and informative work. One is of the most hazardous tasks at international level that is fundamental to build more just or fair societies. Thank you. We didn't introduce him. He was the president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado Quesada, and now it is an honor to invite the co-chair of the organizing committee of this conference, His Excellency Pablo da Silveira, Minister of Education and Culture in Uruguay.
Buenas tardes a todos y permítanme una vez.
Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, welcome to Punta del Este and Uruguay. A couple of minutes just to state some of our concerns, both personal and shared by our government, that might be summarized in one idea, and that is that we are observing the end of the age of innocence in the field of the defense of freedom of expression and freedom of the press. During a certain time, we believed that if we had international declarations protecting human rights and achieved translation into constitutional legal norms, freedom of press and freedom of expression would be essentially protected. Experience has taught that things aren't so easy. First, having international declarations to protect rights didn't ensure that the set of countries internalize these standards and have constitutional and legal protections. And recently, we've discovered that even in cases where these standards have been internalized, we need further conditions to make these protections effective. We know that we now need regulations and audit and control mechanisms protecting us from the use of new technologies or the misuse of new technologies, both by governments as private sector. New technologies have a very positive potential, but may be used by the enemies of freedom to try to decrease the freedom. And even without that, our own uses of this technology may generate undesired effects. In new technologies, we are similar to children that can release forces that they cannot later control. But the technological challenge isn't all of this. To have a free press, we must have journalists capable of working independently and living in a good way from their work. And for this, we need media capable of hiring them, that therefore have economic independence and strength to survive without having to respond to anybody's orders.
Vemos que ese es un frente que hoy nos plantea problemas. El simple dato de cómo se traslada dinero que antes se usaba para pagar publicidad en medios tradicionales a pagar publicidad en las redes y en las plataformas es un dato que nos indica el tamaño del desafío que enfrentamos. Y además de todo eso necesitamos un público capaz de generar demandas de calidad a los medios y al trabajo de los periodistas. Porque si la demanda que predomina es la demanda que satisfacen las redes sociales en su peor versión y hay poca demanda para periodismo de calidad, ese es un problema muy difícil de solucionar. Del mismo modo, si tomamos medidas para tratar de proteger la libertad, pero millones y millones de individuos, para proteger la...
To protect privacy, but millions and millions of people deliver private information voluntarily online and on social media, it is very difficult to control such dynamics. None of these challenges have easy solutions. For example, just to name the latest one, it is true that in a way we need to educate demand, but the problem is that too many people confuse educated demand to the type of demand that they wish to see that they could control. What we need is to generate virtuous dynamics between journalism that can be independent and good quality journalism, and at the same time, an audience that can appreciate the value of that product, that seeks that product, and that provides support to it, and weaken, in a way, the unsettling demands that we are going to find in the real world. We need a culture that demands quality information, opinion, analysis as an essential component for survival of journalism as we know it. None of this is easy. None of these will have easy answers. None of this will be solved with few decisions by the governments or whoever the decision maker is. Our challenge is to think over these issues, to look for answers together, and to do everything that we can to implement such solutions.
Y ahora tengo el honor de invitar aquí al podio a la presidenta de la Comisión Interamericana.
I will welcome Julissa Mantilla Falcón, President of the Human Rights Commission.
Muy buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And I've noticed in these past few days that it seems that language and gender-inclusive language is not very common. We don't use it as much as we should. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to greet UNESCO authorities, United Nations authorities, and European Commission authorities here today. And as the president of the Inter-American Convention for Human Rights, I want to thank Uruguay, I want to thank UNESCO for hosting this very important event, an event that is so key for freedom of expression and the work of journalists in the region and in the world. The Inter-American Commission, and not everyone might know that it is the entry gate to the Inter-American system. Many times we stress the sentences of the Inter-American Court, but the first entry point to review whether a request is admissible or not is the Commission. And the precautionary measures, these are special protective measures that the Commission will grant and has granted, for example, to Claudia Duque and the journalists from El Faro in El Salvador and so many other people. Journalists, as I said, but also human rights defenders. In this sense, I want to mention how the Inter-American Commission has a special rapporteurship for freedom of expression. The rapporteur, Pedro Vaca, is here with us today. For a very long time, ever since the rapporteurship was set up, had made visible from the perspective of international standards the violation of human rights affecting journalists in particular, but also the use of surveillance software in many countries. The technology that has meant that supposedly should mean protection is also being used for surveillance, for intimidation, for journalists, but also human rights defenders. Because in current days, and the rapporteur knows very well, there is a very blurred line between those who are journalists and work in journalism, but at the same time defend human rights. It is freedom of expression. It is that information that goes beyond traditional media and that we can find on social media, the one that will allow us to make human rights violations visible, to report human rights violations, and for the Commission to act. Since 2013, the Inter-American Commission has celebrated the thematic hearings with those affected, civil society, and the states, in addition to private work meetings. And it's something that I wanted to stress again. In addition to the public work of the Commission, we also host private meetings for confidentiality purposes and protection. On October 28, 2013, we hosted a thematic hearing on freedom of expression in the United States. Since 2013, on October 27, 2021, we had a public hearing on freedom of expression and privacy. And on March 16 this year, a hearing on the situation of human rights in the context of cyber surveillance in El Salvador. It is in this framework of these hearings and meetings that organizations that we have worked with questioned and challenged the lack of democratic controls and the lack of transparency in the use and implementation of surveillance technologies by the state. At the same time, at the beginning of the year, together with the High Commissioner for United Human Rights Office in Central America, we published a press release speaking about our concern on the use of Pegasus software to spy on journalists and organizations. And let me say very quickly, as the minister said, declarations are not enough to protect human rights. What we need is to understand that those declarations will build standards and soft law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the genesis of the Universal International Human Rights System, has become an international custom. You might say, well, everyone complies with the declaration. It is just a declaration. But what if it wasn't there? If this is the case with an existing declaration, what would happen if it didn't exist? So I do think declarations and conventions are important to create a benchmark on what should be done and what it means. What it means the new technologies violate human rights. Technology becomes more sophisticated, and also surveillance and invasion of privacy becomes more sophisticated. The Commission stands on the fact that no person can be subjected to the invasion of their privacy through surveillance just because they exercise their freedom of expression or they are protecting the human rights. That means that their rights and freedom of expression is being violated, not just because it affects people's privacy and it exposes them to extortion and threats, but also because it affects journalist sources. When a journalist or a human rights defender sees their privacy invaded or violated and their devices are hacked, well, that person is at risk, their family are at risk, and the sources are at risk. And that's something that we must remember. The work of the Inter-American Commission stresses on the differentiated impact of surveillance on women. Based on the information that we have documented, and the Rapporteurship on Freedom of Expression has found specific cases of women whose pictures are taken from their phones, from the cell phones, or any personal media, and pictures of their children as well. When talking to them in public hearings or in private conversations, their main concern and fear is not just about themselves, but their children as well. And I would like to stress something that is very important. Inter-American standards, and I am speaking about what the court says on jurisprudence of Cotton Fields Linda Lopez against Venezuela, it says that the general obligation of the states to respect and fulfill human rights when it comes to women, this is strengthen due diligence or reinforce or strict due diligence. What that means is that a state could be found accountable for a non-compliance for their human rights obligations, not just because they are promoting or fostering surveillance, but because they fail to do everything in their power to prevent, sanction, and repair. And do strict due diligence refers to, well, when there is a specific group of people, women journalists, and a known risk by the states, that due diligence, the threshold for that due diligence is much higher. Why am I saying this? this, because even though we are speaking about freedom of expression and women journalists, something that I want to make very clear as the president of the Inter-American Commission and a rapporteur for human rights, women's human rights, is the persistence of gender-based violence. We can understand, we can identify gender-based violence against journalists, but it's not just about the professional career, but it's violence they experience in their day-to-day lives. So all of the measures that are being adopted for the protection to avoid surveillance and the moratorium are measures that we need to adopt through a gender perspective, not only because it is documented, but also because it is an obligation of the state. It is crucial, therefore, to outline strategies to fight illegal or arbitrary surveillance, the use of spyware, for example, reformulating electronic surveillance guidelines, complying with international obligations and human rights obligations. I think it is very important, considering the history of our countries. Before coming here, before traveling to Uruguay, I toured Argentina, and one of the topics that I work with, and I am also a rapporteur for Memory, Truth, and Justice, is the situation of victims during the dictatorship regime in Argentina, and what our countries have experienced. And I really wonder how important it is to have documented and be able to report on these issues, and that surveillance that could have adopted other state elements, invasion of privacy and the violation of human rights, are now using technology. And I think it's now the responsibility of the state, the rapporteur said, is very closely connected to moratoriums, and as Claudia Duque say, to reshape the legal frameworks. We are speaking about violation to the right of privacy, violation to freedom of expression, violation to the right to defend my rights, and if that were not enough, there is a special risk of gender violence for those women who are journalists. Tomorrow we will be part of another panel
related with the UNESCO report on the risk for women when exercising journalism. I hope many of you are there, both men and women. And one of the figures that really struck me in the UNESCO report was that out of the 675 women that had responded to the survey, there was a percentage of nearly 20% that had tried to denounce and hadn't been believed. Nobody had acted. And many of the bosses said, you have to be harsher to work in journalism. And what has been the impact of those situations whereby women stop working in journalism? So when we speak of the concerns regarding surveillance, we can't do it neutrally. And when we speak of this other topic, that is the implementation and promotion of women's participation in the writing the different conventions and the Inter-American Court and Commission, transforming social spaces will provide us more standards and legislative frameworks, but that won't be strong enough and protective, and particularly the risk we're currently observing will remain and increase. Thank you.
Bien, ahora tenemos
another virtual message, this time from the Vice President of the EU, Věra. A short message. Distinguidos.
Press Freedom Day Global Conference. The theme of this year is Journalism Under Digital Siege. The first thoughts of my mind reading this theme are for the people, including the journalists in Ukraine. They are under siege. They are the victims of the aggression of Russia, and we need to do all we can to support them. The theme of this year also makes me think about brave journalist Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize last year along with Dmitry Muratov. She said in her lecture when receiving the prize that what happens on social media does not stay on social media. Online violence is real world violence. And she is right. She also thanked the EU for taking leadership with its Democracy Action Plan, and this makes me very proud. Because the European Democracy Action Plan is our blueprint to ensure that democracy is protected in the digital world. It puts a great emphasis on journalists who play a key role for democracy. It is under the European Democracy Action Plan that, for the first time ever, the European Commission presented recommendations to member states on the safety of journalists. The recommendations are very comprehensive. There is a strong focus on digital protection and the situation of women journalists who face more violence online than their male colleagues. Member states are encouraged to promote the cooperation between online platforms and organizations with expertise in tackling threats against journalists. Cybersecurity bodies should assist journalists who want to check whether their devices have been compromised. These are only some of the recommendations, and the EU is also funding independent projects which can support and assist journalists in need and map attacks online and offline. The Commission also adopted a few days ago legislation and recommendations against abusive litigation against journalists, the so-called SLAPs. Too often, SLAPs are used to silence journalists and prevent them from doing their job. Our next step is the Media Freedom Act. The EU will soon enshrine for the first time in EU law the principles of media pluralism and editorial independence for all media. I hope this will help set a global standard, as the EU has done in the past with data protection rules and is doing now with the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act is a key piece of legislation which has just been agreed on EU level. It will make online platforms more accountable and will better protect users and their fundamental rights, including freedom of expression and the right to information. This gives you a glimpse of the digital rulebook we are working on. Journalists should not work under siege. They should work freely, online and offline, and this should be our common fight. Thank you.
So now we have the honor to invite another distinguished guest, Mohamed Rahman Swaray, Minister of Communication and Information of Sierra Leone.
Good afternoon, distinguished hosts, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, on behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone, extend thanks and appreciation for the warm welcome and hospitality extended to my delegation since our arrival here 2 days ago. Let me start by saying that my presence here today is a testament of our government's commitment to media freedom and media viability. The government of Sierra Leone is committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and its National Medium-Term Development Plan to reduce poverty and underdevelopment. The media provides an important vehicle to deliver on these objectives. However, my government inherited a weak media, fraught with media poverty and a draconian media law that criminalizes the journalism profession. Last year's UNESCO World Press Freedom Day theme was about the media as a public good. Sierra Leone strongly believes in this. Our first task was to decriminalize the 55-year-old libel law, review the Independent Media Commission laws, and join the Global Media Freedom Coalition. We acknowledge as a government that legal reforms alone are not enough, which is why my government is providing annual subventions to the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists. Because of the bold reforms by the government, the media fraternity in Sierra Leone last year conferred on His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio the title of Champion of Press Freedom. Despite this conferment, the media in Sierra Leone remained the loudest critic of our government, which is really good for democratic sustainability. Today, no journalist is in prison, and this year's annual meeting of the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists will be the second consecutive year to witness no marches demanding the release of imprisoned journalists. But this alone is not enough. We will not be doing our job as a government if we do not look at the ecosystem and how we, as a government, can work with the sector to ensure that media that works in the public interest can survive and thrive. A media that has been significantly diversified and decentralized with over 500 registered media institutions at the last count in 2021. Expecting the government to provide funding without ensuring that the conditions for media are optimized is not going to solve the problem. We need to re-engineer the whole sector so that there is a viable economic basis for this. Our national budget is limited, and there are many demands on it. We therefore invite you to join us on this effort. The building blocks for an independent, viable media landscape has to be a collective effort of all and sundry. We as a government are aware that for the media to work in the interest of the public, everyone needs to come together. So we have been involved in a process of national consultations and learning from our other international experiences, culminating in the convening of the first National Media Viability and Investment Conference in Freetown in the lead up to the World Press Freedom Day. I have the greatest pleasure to unveil, and at this point, I will ask my colleagues to distribute a two-pager roadmap that came out from the consultations. I have the greatest pleasure to unveil the National Action Plan that resulted from this conference in Sierra Leone at the conference. The action plan is not mine. It is jointly owned by all media stakeholders in Sierra Leone. But we as government pledge that we'll stick to our side of it and will continue to play a convening role. In the coming days, I will take the recommendations from the National Media Viability and Investment Conference to support public interest media to cabinet, and next steps for all those involved in this initiative is to develop a mechanism where these recommendations can be translated into concrete actions so that we can all work together to achieve the purposes by providing sustainable funding pathways for public interest media in Sierra Leone. We cannot do this alone. The initiative is already supported by a consortium of media development, international non-governmental organizations, and is overseen by the committee working on media viability and investment housed by the Independent Media Commission. We will work to ensure that there is coordination and harmony on all investment in improving the media sector work. Sierra Leone is leading the way with this initiative. It is consistent with the principles of the Windhoek Plus 30 principles announced in last year's World Press Freedom Day. We and our partners in this are committed to taking the draft national action and developing it into a detailed work plan that would implement over the next coming year. We will undoubtedly hit some obstacles, but we believe that we have a unique opportunity to achieve something that will not only result in a thriving media in Sierra Leone, but perhaps provide a learning opportunity to other countries. We will continue to share our experience of this journey. I will be happy to come back here in a year's time to report on the progress we have made as a country. I thank you very much. God bless you.
Bien, ahora tenemos tres mensajes.
Well, we have 3 recorded messages, one from the Minister of the Republic of Guyana, another from Lithuania, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the last from Ukraine, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Please use the headsets when required.
The government of Guyana is particularly concerned about continuing threats to the freedom and safety of journalists everywhere. The recent deaths and injuries to journalists exercising their universal freedom of practice in Ukraine is wholly unacceptable under any circumstances. In this regard, we implore the international community of nations, UNESCO, the Media Freedom Coalition, and other guardians of the free press to exercise stronger collective efforts to bolster the integrity of the guardrails meant for their protection. We in Guyana have been steadily expanding and strengthening our national bastions of the Guyanese media community, while forging partnerships for its growth and advancement across multiple sectors. We continue to promote an enabling environment to allow local journalists and media practitioners to strive and excel in all aspects of their career, including through upskilling interventions and other educational advancements. This year, as part of these global commemorations of press freedom, my Portfolio Secretariat for Information and Public Affairs will host a national media conference and symposium in partnership with the Guyana Press Association and other national stakeholders. As part of that activity, we will be unveiling our groundbreaking initiative for extensive world-class training and certification through the inauguration of the Guyana Media and Communication Academy. The Academy's wide-ranging programs will be available to all media practitioners across the national spectrum through collaboration with the global online learning platform Coursera. Our government and all actors within the Guyanese Fourth Estate remain jointly and unequivocally committed to the preservation of the universal principles that underpin the exercise of press freedoms in all its forms. Our country now, ranked by the International Monetary Fund as being on course to achieving the highest GDP growth in the world, is concomitantly on course to fulfilling most, if not all, of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including those which will further enhance the enabling environment for an eternally free press. On behalf of the government and people of Guyana, and indeed on behalf of the Guyanese media, I wish to commend the UNESCO Organizing Committee for yet another splendid conference, as I look forward to benefiting from other insights for the remainder of the program. Happy World Press Freedom Day.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my appreciation to UNESCO for hosting the World Press Freedom Conference. It is an honor to congratulate the Belarusian Association of Journalists, the laureate of the 2022 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize. Thank you for your brave standing against authoritarianism and highest dedication to democratic values and media freedom. This award symbolizes that free and independent media helps to protect against the abuse of power. Universally guaranteed access to information is key to the promotion and protection of all other human rights and fundamental freedoms, online and offline. However, media freedom is subject to growing threats around the globe. The right to accurate and objective information is challenged by propaganda and disinformation, accompanied by surveillance and repression, as well as offensive digital restrictions against independent media outlets, human rights defenders, and journalists. Today, as we mark World Press Freedom Day, courageous journalists and other media workers are risking their lives to keep us informed about Russia's illegal and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine, which is preceded by a steady outpouring of fabricated claims aimed at concealing Kremlin's war crimes and atrocities in Ukraine. Russia is targeting local journalists and foreign correspondents for doing their job, for the fact-based coverage of the war. It is a violation of the international human rights law. Already, 10 local and international journalists were killed covering Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, including Lithuanian filmmaker Mantas, who was killed by Russian forces in Mariupol. With these actions, Russia, together with its accomplice Belarus, seeks to undermine peace, prosperity, and our rules-based international system. On a separate note, a word of admiration and solidarity to women journalists and other female media workers covering difficult social, political, and war-related issues. They often experience pressure and persecution by authoritarian regimes as journalists, and also targeted discrimination as women. We owe them our full support and protection. We call on governments, social media platforms, individuals, to come together to support a resilient and viable independent media sector and prevent the spread of disinformation that intends to create a parallel reality and justify the crimes and atrocities committed in Ukraine, as well as other parts of the world. We cannot allow it. I thank you.
Dear distinguished participants, I'm pleased to take part in the annual World Press Freedom Day Global Conference. Historically, freedom of speech and expression has always been inherent to the Ukrainian people. However, since 2014, Russian occupiers have jeopardized freedom of speech in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The full-scale war unleashed by Russia against my country on February 24th goes together with even more brutal repressions against independent journalism in Ukraine. As of now, the invaders killed 22 Ukrainian and foreign journalists. Věra, a wonderful person, a wonderful professional, a journalist for Radio Free Europe, is the recent victim of Russian missile. She was killed on April 22nd. Russia committed this crime when UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was visiting Kyiv and thus showed his real attitude to international institutions and the basic principles of international law. In total, according to the Institute of Mass Information, Ukrainian-based analytics center, Russia has committed 243 crimes against journalists and media in Ukraine. The list of crimes includes murder and abduction of journalists, shelling and seizure of TV towers, hacking attacks on Ukrainian media websites, shelling of media offices, and shutting down Ukrainian broadcasting. Along with military aggression, Russia wages information warfare. Now, Ukrainian cities occupied or besieged by Russia are cut from Ukrainian United News Marathon and reliable Ukrainian online media sources. It is Russia's propaganda that has prepared the ground for full-scale invasion on Ukraine. The outcome speaks for itself. In Russia, 74% of population favors the war. Worshipping Russian symbols becomes a part of school's curriculum like Nazi times. The level of brainwash is unprecedented, and the most worrisome is that arguments and facts cannot break false perceptions of zombified population. It is like radiation. You can't see it, but it affects your health, in this case, mental health. EU sanctions against Russia today and Sputnik, together with Ukraine's special restrictive measures against Russia's propagandists, have limited destructive capacities. Together with your help, Ukraine has been winning the information warfare because the truth is the best counter-propaganda. However, more is still to be done. We call on international community to further act and sanction Russia's and Belarus's media that disseminate propaganda and disinformation. History proves that Russia must have no chance to suppress freedom of speech and expression in Ukraine. These are our core values, and we will defend them not only in Ukraine but elsewhere. And together, we will win. Thank you for your attention.